The night they tried to kill me didn't feel real at first. Maybe because the fire started like a whisper, not a scream. I was sitting in my reading room wrapped in my husband's old cardigan, a cup of chamomile tea cooling beside me when I caught the faint scent of gasoline. It floated through the air, thin, oily, impossible to mistake once you've smelled it before. At first I thought maybe something was wrong with the heater. Then I saw the reflection of light on the window, orange and hungry, growing in seconds. My stepdaughter had been in the house just 10 minutes earlier. She'd brought me a casserole and said she wanted to talk to clear the air, but she'd smiled too tightly, her eyes flicking toward the front door the same way she always did when she was hiding something. "Stay here, Eleanor," she'd said. "I'll grab the lighter from the garage to light some candles. It's too dark in this old house." Then she never came back. Now the flames were crawling along the baseboards, licking up the wallpaper like they'd been waiting for permission. I remember standing there, frozen, hearing the sound of crackling wood mixing with the rain hitting the roof outside. Somewhere deep down, I knew what had happened. Vanessa hadn't gone to get a lighter. She'd gone to burn me alive. I rushed to the door, but the handle was hot enough to blister my hand. Locked. The back exit was blocked by furniture that hadn't been there before. Every way out was sealed, and in the reflection of the window, I saw myself surrounded by fire. You know, people think betrayal hurts most when it's emotional, when someone lies to you or cheats you, but that's not true. The deepest cut is when someone you raised as your own decides you're worth more dead than alive. When the child you once braided hair for looks you in the eyes and sees a paycheck. The air grew thick with smoke. I dropped to the floor, crawling, coughing eyes, stinging. The curtains fell in flames beside me, a fiery wall cutting off half the room. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it over the roar. I pressed my cheek against the cold tile, and one thought kept repeating like a prayer. Not like this. I won't die like this. Not in my husband's house. Not by her hands. I crawled toward the window, the one that overlooked the garden he had planted before he passed. I could barely see through the haze, but I remembered the layout by heart. The bookshelf, then the small desk, then 2 steps to the window. Each move felt like swimming through boiling water. I reached the latch, but it was painted shut. Outside, thunder cracked and rain poured harder, almost mocking me with its distance. I slammed my elbow into the glass, once, twice. The third time it shattered, slicing my arm open, but the pain didn't matter. I pulled myself up, choking half blind, my lungs screaming for air. When I fell through that window into the wet grass below, I thought I was free. I wasn't. The roof collapsed behind me, throwing sparks into the rain. From the driveway, I saw her car. Vanessa stood there, umbrella in hand, watching the fire like it was fireworks. She didn't know I was still alive. Her silhouette was calm, elegant, even the kind of calm only a murderer can have when they believe no one will ever know. I hid behind the hedges, rain soaking through my clothes, smoke still rising from my hair. My mind was a blur, but one thought burned brighter than the flames. She didn't just want my house. She wanted the insurance money. She wanted the life I built with her father, the one she thought should have been hers. That night, as the sirens wailed and neighbors gathered outside the gates, Vanessa screamed and cried for the cameras. My poor mother, she told them. She must have left a candle burning. They comforted her while firefighters combed through the ashes looking for my body. I watched from the shadows, my teeth chattering, my heart steadying. No one saw me slip away into the darkness, barefoot, covered in soot. No one saw the living ghost walk down the empty street. You might think the story ends there with survival, but surviving isn't the end when someone has tried to erase your existence. It's just the beginning. In that moment, I stopped being the old woman she thought she could manipulate. I became something else. I became her consequence. I wandered for miles that night through the rain and the sirens and the flashing lights. I made it to a roadside diner before sunrise. The waitress looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. Maybe she had. I asked for black coffee, hands shaking as I tried to hold the cup. When she asked what happened, I just said, "My house burned down." She gave me a blanket and told me to wait until morning. I stared out the window as dawn broke, and all I could think was how quiet the world seemed after the fire. quiet but not peaceful, the kind of quiet before a storm returns. People always say fire destroys, but they forget it also purifies. It burns away illusions, lies, and pretense until all that's left is truth. The truth was simple. My stepdaughter had wanted me dead. She wanted the deed, the insurance, the inheritance her father had left under my name. And now she thought she had it all. But she'd made one mistake. She'd underestimated how stubborn a woman can be when she has nothing left to lose. So I made a promise to myself right there in that diner. I would stay dead. To the world, Eleanor Blake would be ashes in a burned-out house. To Vanessa, I'd be a closed chapter, a corpse that could never speak again. And while she lived her life celebrating her new fortune, I would rebuild mine in the shadows, quietly, patiently, until the day I returned not as her victim, but as the storm she never saw coming. You see, revenge doesn't always wear fury. Sometimes it wears silence. It walks softly, waits long, and smiles when it finally knocks on the door. I wasn't after blood. I was after truth, and the law was going to deliver it for me. But first I had to become invisible. That's where my story really begins. But before I tell you how I came back from the fire, let me ask you something. If the person you raised tried to burn you alive for money, would you forgive them, or would you let them feel the same heat you felt? Comment 1. If you believe betrayal deserves punishment, like this video, if you still think redemption is possible, because when the flames died that night, I didn't die with them. I was reborn. And the world that thought it had buried me was about to learn what happens when a woman walks out of the fire still burning inside. I used to think grief made people kind. When my husband Richard died 2 years ago, I thought our family would pull closer together. But grief didn't make Vanessa kind. It made her hungry. She was Richard's daughter from his first marriage, the woman he used to call his wild heart. I tried to love her truly. I cooked her favorite meals when she visited, helped her polish. Her resume even offered to co-sign her first mortgage. But after his funeral, something in her eyes shifted. It wasn't sadness, it was calculation. The morning after the burial, she came to the house early, carrying coffee and a soft voice pretending to care. "You shouldn't be alone, Eleanor," she said, her tone coated with concern. "This house is so big for one person. Why don't we look into something smaller? A condo near the city, maybe." She smiled sweetly, but her gaze kept wandering to the walls, the paintings, the antique clock Richard had inherited from his father. I felt like she wasn't seeing a home, she was seeing inventory. I brushed it off at first. Grief makes people say stupid things, I told myself. But a week later, she brought over a man in a suit. "Just a friend," she said. "He's in real estate giving us advice." He shook my hand politely, but I noticed the way he looked around, assessing, measuring. When Vanessa guided him to the study, my study, I heard her whisper, "This room alone could fetch over $100,000 if she agrees to sell." She said it like I wasn't standing just a few feet away. That night, I sat in my husband's chair listening to the grandfather clock tick through the empty house. Each tick sounded like a warning. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that maybe Vanessa was just trying to help me downsize. But deep inside, I knew something was off. The way she'd been hovering since the funeral, the way she'd handled the will reading, like she already knew what it said, it all felt rehearsed. Richard's will had been simple. The house, the land, and all assets went to me. Vanessa received a trust that would activate after my death. "She'll be taken care of," Richard had said. "But I want you safe, Ellie. This house is your home." He trusted her the same way I did once. I didn't see the storm brewing behind her practiced smile. A few weeks later, the subtle changes began. I'd find drawers, rearranged important papers missing. She started visiting to check on me, but her questions were never about how I was doing. They were about what I planned to do with the house, or if I'd thought about adjusting the will. Every conversation ended the same way, her suggesting that I let her help with the paperwork since she was so good with documents. Then came the day I found the first real clue. It was a letter from our insurance company tucked between the bills on the kitchen counter. I hadn't opened mail in a few days, so I assumed it was routine correspondence. But when I read the header, Policy Beneficiary Adjustment Confirmation, my stomach turned to ice. The letter stated that the homeowner's insurance had been updated, listing Vanessa Blake as the secondary beneficiary in case of loss or damage. I never signed anything. My hand trembled as I reread it. Someone had forged my signature. That night I called the insurance office. The agent on the other end sounded confused. "Yes, Mrs. Blake," she said. "We received the form directly from your address 2 weeks ago. Everything looked in order. She even described the signature steady, clean, nothing like the arthritic scrawl my hand made these days. Could I get a copy of the form, I asked? There was a pause. "I'm sorry, but that document is confidential. You'll need to make a formal request." Confidential. My own life, my own house suddenly locked behind someone else's permissions. I hung up and stared at the letter, the ink smudging beneath my fingertips. That was the first night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching headlights crawl down the wet road, each one reminding me how alone I was. 2 days later, Vanessa showed up unannounced. She was wearing a silk blouse and perfume too strong for daytime, her smile as polished as ever. "I brought you lunch," she said, placing a paper bag on the counter. "And I thought we could go over some documents together. Dad's estate still needs sorting." I felt the letter burning in my pocket. "You mean my estate," I corrected quietly. For a moment, her smile faltered. "Of course," she said, recovering. "I just mean it's complicated handling these things alone." Then she pulled out a folder. Inside were several forms with highlighted lines. "These are just updates for tax purposes." She said, to simplify everything. I looked at the top page. It was another transfer authorization. This one wasn't about insurance, it was for the property deed. If I signed it, the house would legally fall under joint ownership. Her name was printed right beneath mine in clean, bold letters. "Vanessa," I said slowly, "why does this say joint ownership?" She didn't blink. "It's just easier legally. That way, if something happens, I can handle the paperwork for you." "If something happens," I repeated, "like what, another funeral?" Her jaw tightened. "You're being dramatic." "Am I said. "Because I received a letter from the insurance company." That's when I saw it, just for a second, the flicker in her eyes. Fear. She tried to mask it, but it was there, sharp and fleeting. Then she laughed too loudly. "Oh, that must have been a clerical error. I'll look into it." She gathered the papers too quickly, shoving them back into her bag. When she left, the silence she left behind was heavier than before. I realized then that grief hadn't made her hungry. It had made her ruthless. That night I went through every drawer, every cabinet. I found copies of Richard's documents, some originals missing. A few even had faint outlines where signatures used to be, like someone had traced them to practice. My chest felt tight, my vision blurry. I wanted to believe she wouldn't hurt me, that she was still the same girl who once called me Ellie and asked me to teach her how to bake bread. But love doesn't erase evidence. It only delays justice. When I looked at the photos on the mantel, me, Richard, and Vanessa smiling in front of the same house she was now trying to steal, the betrayal finally sank in. I whispered to the empty room, "You won't get it. Not this house. Not my name. Not the life I built with him." But I had no idea then that she didn't plan to take it while I lived. She planned to make sure I didn't live at all. The world has a cruel way of warning you. You just have to be listening. Sometimes it's a word you overhear, a paper left on a desk, or a neighbor who talks too much. For me, it was all three. It happened on a Saturday morning when the world was pretending to be normal. The sky was clear. The lawn still glistened from the sprinkler, and I was pretending to prune the roses Richard planted. I hadn't seen Vanessa for 3 days, and that absence should have felt peaceful, but it didn't. Silence from her was never a blessing. It was strategy. Paul, my next-door neighbor, was out washing his old pickup truck. He was in his 70s, a widower with more kindness than sense. He'd known Richard for years and had always treated me like family. When he spotted me, he waved, but his expression was hesitant. "Mornin', Ellie," he called. "You got a minute?" I nodded and crossed the yard. His eyes darted toward the street before he lowered his voice. I wasn't sure whether to say anything, but I figured you ought to know. "Know what?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He wiped his hands on a rag, stalling. "Couple days ago, I saw Vanessa over by the insurance office on Main. She wasn't alone, had some man with her suit and tie briefcase, all businesslike. I went over to say hi, but when she saw me, she looked startled, tried to act like she didn't know me for a second. I felt a cold prickle crawl up the back of my neck. Maybe she was just busy, I said, my voice too calm. Could be, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But I overheard something when I walked past. Couldn't help it. They were talking about coverage limits and fire clauses. Sounded like insurance talk. She said something about making sure it triggers properly. That's a strange way to talk about insurance, ain't it? I tried to smile, but the corners of my mouth wouldn't obey. Yes, strange indeed. Paul studied me, his brow creasing. You okay, Ellie? You look pale. I'm fine, I lied. Probably just the heat. But my mind was already spinning. Fire clauses, trigger properly. Those weren't words you used unless you were planning for something that needed to burn. That night I sat at my desk with the old lamp casting a cone of yellow light across the papers. I pulled out the insurance letter again, then searched through Richard's old files for contact information. The name I found on the original policy matched the logo Paul had described Midland Property Insurance. When I called, the receptionist transferred me to a man named Harrison. His voice was smooth, professional. Mrs. Blake, how can I help you this evening? I took a slow breath. I'm just confirming a few details about my homeowner's policy. I want to make sure the coverage hasn't changed. He hesitated before answering. According to our records, you're fully covered for firestorm and flood. Your secondary beneficiary is listed as Miss Vanessa Blake. I clenched my hand around the phone cord. And when was that change made? Looks like 3 weeks ago, he said. It was processed through our partner branch downtown. I believe Miss Blake came in personally to finalize the paperwork. She mentioned you were too ill to attend. Too ill? I nearly laughed out loud. The kind of laugh that hides fury. I see. I said evenly. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. That's all I needed. When I hung up, my hands were shaking so hard that the phone nearly slipped from my grasp. My own stepdaughter had forged my illness to sign away the right to profit from my death. And the man she'd been with, the one Paul saw, was probably that insurance agent. Everything suddenly made sense. The forged signature, the way she'd been pushing me to update documents, the sudden surge of false affection. She wasn't waiting for me to die of old age. She was designing the perfect accident. The next morning, I baked cookies. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed a reason to visit Paul without raising suspicion. I carried the tin next door, smiling like everything was fine. He invited me in for coffee. Paul, I said carefully, could I ask you to do me a favor? Don't mention what you saw to Vanessa. Not yet. He frowned. Ellie, if something funny's going on, I can call someone. Not yet, I interrupted gently. Please, I just need time to handle it right. She's fragile. He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. All right, but if you need anything you call me, you hear. I will, I promised, though I already knew I wouldn't. What I needed wasn't help, it was proof. That night, I went into the study, what used to be Richard's domain. I'd left everything exactly as it was. His desk, his notes, his old safe hidden behind the bookshelf. My hands trembled as I spun the combination. Inside were his business ledgers, tax files, and a folder marked insurance. Inside that folder, I found photocopies of every policy we'd ever signed except the new one. Hers was missing. And then something caught my eye, a carbon copy of a recent correspondence form. On the bottom, a sticky note in Vanessa's handwriting read, "Remember to update. Fire coverage. Make it retroactive." I stared at those words until the letters blurred. Retroactive. She wasn't just planning for an accident, she wanted to ensure the payout would seem legitimate, even if the fire looked suspicious. My breath came shallow and quick. I felt like the walls were closing and the air thickening. Then I remembered something else. Paul had said she looked startled when she saw me. That meant she didn't know she'd been overheard. That meant I still had the advantage. I started writing everything down that night. Dates, times, conversations, every document that didn't feel right. I photographed each page with my phone, saved it to a hidden drive. I labeled the folder, "In case I'm gone." At 2 a.m., I heard a sound outside. Soft, deliberate footsteps on the gravel driveway. I turned off the light, heart pounding. Through the curtain, I saw her silhouette Vanessa standing under the porch light, looking at the house like she was measuring it. She stood there for almost a full minute before walking away. When I finally exhaled, I realized my palms were bleeding from how hard I'd been gripping the edge of the desk. The next day, she showed up all smiles again. "Morning, Eleanor," she said cheerfully, setting a grocery bag on the counter. "I got your favorite tea." Her tone was light, almost too light. I wanted to scream at her to throw the evidence in her face. Instead, I smiled back. "That's sweet of you," I said. "I was just sorting through Richard's things. I found some of our old documents." "Did you ever take care of that fire coverage you mentioned?" Her eyes flickered for half a second before she composed herself. "Oh yes, all handled. You don't have to worry about a thing." "I'm sure I don't," I replied softly. "You've always been so thorough." She grinned. "I try." As she left, she reached out and squeezed my shoulder. "You know, Eleanor, you really shouldn't stress so much. At your age, it's not healthy." Her nails pressed just a little too hard into my skin before she pulled away. That touch told me everything her words didn't. When the door closed behind her, I let out the breath I'd been holding. For the first time in months, I stopped feeling afraid. Fear had been replaced by something far more useful: clarity. If Vanessa wanted a fire, I would make sure the only thing burned was her plan. But I also knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. It was only beginning, and the next move would have to be mine. And if you were in my place watching someone you once called family quietly prepare your funeral, what would you do? Would you confront them, or would you wait, collect proof, and strike when they least expect it? Comment 1 if you'd fight back silently, like this video if you'd call it justice. Because the truth doesn't just expose itself. Sometimes you have to light the match yourself. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from not being believed. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa didn't have to kill me with fire. She did it with whispers, subtle, quiet, deliberate. It began with small things. The neighbor who used to bring me groceries stopped showing up. The women from church who called every Sunday suddenly had busy schedules. Even Paul, who had always waved from his porch, now just nodded politely, his eyes uncertain. Something in the air had shifted, and I could feel Vanessa's hand behind it. The first time I noticed it clearly was at the pharmacy. I went to refill my medication, and the pharmacist leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was discussing a secret. "Mrs. Blake, your stepdaughter came by last week," he said. "She mentioned you've been having some memory issues. Said we should double-check your prescriptions to avoid any confusion." Memory issues. The words hit me like a slap. "Excuse me," I asked sharply. He looked uncomfortable. "She said you've been mixing up your doses. She was worried about you." I laughed, short, bitter. "That's strange," I said, "because I'm the one who organizes her father's medical records for 15 years. He shifted awkwardly, muttering something about protocols, but the damage was done. Vanessa was building a version of me for the world, a confused old woman slipping into senility, a woman no one would trust if something happened. At first I tried to ignore it, but each day the isolation grew thicker, heavier. A friend from the local charity I'd volunteered with stopped returning my calls. When I asked why, she sighed over the phone. "Oh, Eleanor," Vanessa said, "you've been overwhelmed. You should rest, dear." By the time the mail stopped coming, my bills mysteriously redirected letters missing, I knew Vanessa had extended her campaign into every corner of my life. She was tightening the noose, one quiet rumor at a time. The only person still visiting was Vanessa herself. She came every other evening, always with that mask of pity. "You're not eating enough," she'd say. "You forgot to lock the back door again. Or you really should see a doctor, Eleanor. You've been forgetting things lately." At first I argued back, but then I realized something terrifying. Every argument, every flash of anger only made me look more unstable. So I started playing along. I smiled when she called me forgetful. I nodded when she suggested I see a therapist. I even pretended to misplace things on purpose to make her feel confident in her illusion. Let her believe she was winning. One afternoon, she brought a social worker with her. "This is Mrs. Hardy," Vanessa said sweetly. "She specializes in elder care. I thought it might be good for you to talk." The woman smiled at me like I was a child. "How are we feeling today, Mrs. Blake?" I kept my tone calm, polite. "We're feeling quite capable, thank you." Vanessa gave a small, performative laugh. "Oh, Eleanor, you and your formal answers. She's always been so proper." Mrs. Hardy smiled indulgently. "I understand. It's hard to accept help sometimes." I said nothing. But when they left, I followed them quietly to the porch unseen, and I heard Vanessa's voice drop. She's declining faster than I expected. I'm trying to keep her safe, but she refuses to cooperate. Maybe we should start the guardianship paperwork soon." Guardianship paperwork. The words sank deep like a stone in my stomach. If she succeeded, she wouldn't even need the fire. She'd take everything legally: my home, my finances, my life. That night I went into the attic. The smell of dust and cedar was comforting familiar. Richard and I had stored our life there in boxes, old photographs, letters, even the blueprint of the house we'd built together. I sat down and opened one of the boxes, flipping through old memories, until I found the one that stopped my breath. It was a family photo taken 15 years ago, the three of us smiling in front of this same house. Richard had his arm around both of us. I was in the middle. Back then, Vanessa's smile looked real. She was young, glowing, still unbroken by greed. I touched her face in the photo and whispered, "You could have had everything if you just waited, but you wanted it all now." When the phone rang that night, I nearly jumped. It was Paul. His voice sounded uneasy. "Ellie, can I ask you something? Vanessa came by today. She asked me if I'd noticed any odd behavior. Said you'd been forgetting people's names, leaving the stove on." I told her no, of course not, but she looked, well, disappointed. "Thank you for telling me," I said softly. "You've always been a good friend." "I don't know what she's playing at," he muttered. "But be careful, Ellie. You know how rumors travel." "I know," I said. "They travel fast when someone's fanning the flames." After that call, I stopped sleeping altogether. Every night, I'd lie awake listening for sounds. Footsteps outside the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of papers. I even caught myself whispering aloud, rehearsing explanations for police officers who might one day find me accidentally dead. Then came the day I realized she'd started tampering with my environment. I came home from a doctor's appointment, one she'd insisted I attend, and found the back door unlocked. The stove was on. A candle burned unattended in the living room, all little subtle hints of carelessness. I checked the fuse box. Half the circuits had been tripped. My throat tightened as I noticed faint scratches on the lock. Someone had been picking it. That night she called me. "Eleanor, did you leave the oven on again?" she asked sweetly. "I didn't," I said flatly. "Oh dear," she sighed. "You really shouldn't live alone anymore. It's dangerous." I wanted to scream, but instead I said calmly, "You're right. Danger is closer than I thought." She didn't catch the meaning. Or maybe she did and just didn't care. By the end of that month, she had convinced half the town I was slipping into dementia. When the pastor from church visited, his eyes were full of pity. "Eleanor, we're all worried about you," he said gently. "Vanessa mentioned you've been confused lately, talking to yourself." I smiled the same smile I'd been practicing for weeks. "Oh, I'm fine, Pastor. I only talk to myself when the truth gets too lonely." He looked at me oddly, probably thinking that was proof enough of my madness. But here's the thing. When people stop believing in you, it frees you. I realized I could move in silence. No one would suspect the woman they thought was losing her mind. No one would see her setting traps for the one who set her up. One evening, as the sun bled through the curtains, I found Vanessa in the garden. She was pruning Richard's roses, his roses, the ones he'd planted for me when we bought this house. I stood in the doorway watching her snip each stem carelessly, her movements sharp and impatient. "You should be careful," I said finally. "Those thorns can cut deep." She didn't look up. "Don't worry, Eleanor. I'm used to a little blood." Her tone was so casual that it took me a second to process the malice buried in it. Then she smiled at me almost tenderly. "You really should think about moving, you know. I can help with the arrangements." "I'm staying here," I said simply. She shrugged. "Suit yourself. But houses like this, they have a way of outliving their owners." That night, I opened the window in my bedroom and watched her drive away. Her taillights disappeared down the long gravel road, and I whispered into the darkness, "Try it. Just try it. You'll see who survives." I didn't know then how soon she'd test that promise. The next morning, I found an envelope under my door. No return address, no handwriting, just a single typed note. "Insurance review complete. Beneficiary confirmed. Effective immediately." No company logo, no signature. Just that one line. I stared at it for a long time, the words burning like an omen. I folded the paper neatly and placed it in my evidence folder right beside the photographs and notes I'd been collecting. The folder was thick now, heavy with truth. But truth alone doesn't save you from fire. That night, I dreamed of smoke, thick, black, endless, and when I woke, I could still smell it. If you were in my place, surrounded by lies so carefully crafted that even your own friends doubted your sanity, what would you do? Would you beg them to believe you or let them keep underestimating you until the moment they choke on the truth? Comment 1, if you'd let them think you're crazy. Like this video, if you'd rather fight in silence. Because sometimes the best weapon a woman can have is the one they don't see coming. The night she chose to kill me was quiet, almost too quiet. That kind of silence that feels rehearsed, as if the world itself is holding its breath. It was late October, the air sharp with the first bite of winter. The day had been uneventful, too uneventful. Vanessa hadn't called, hadn't stopped by, hadn't texted, just absence. And in my life, her absence was never peace. It was the inhale before the strike. Around 6 that evening, the phone rang. Her voice was soft, syrupy, sweet. "Eleanor, it's me. I've been thinking about us, about how distant we've become. I hate the tension between us." She paused, waiting for me to respond. I didn't. She continued, "I cooked dinner tonight, your favorite roast chicken with rosemary. Why don't you come over? Just the two of us. Let's start over." I knew immediately. She never cooked for me, never invited me to her place. It was always the other way around. Still, I agreed. "All right, Vanessa. I'll be there soon." When I hung up, I stood in the middle of my kitchen staring at the clock ticking above the stove. My reflection in the window looked foreign. Older, yes, but sharper somehow. I opened the drawer and pulled out the small flash drive I'd been using to store evidence. I slipped it into the pocket of my coat along with the folded insurance letter. Then, after a moment's hesitation, I reached into the cupboard and took out a small kitchen knife. Not to fight, just to feel less helpless. Her house was only 15 minutes away on the edge of town near the woods. When I arrived, her car was parked out front, lights glowing warm through the windows. Too warm, too perfect. She opened the door before I even knocked, smiling like a hostess in a magazine. "You came," she said brightly. "I was afraid you'd say no." Inside, the smell of rosemary and lemon filled the air, but beneath it was something else. Something metallic, faint, but unmistakable. Gasoline. My pulse quickened. She led me to the dining room. The table was set for 2 fine china wine glasses candles. "I wanted tonight to be special," she said, pouring wine into both glasses. "I know things have been strained." I sat across from her, watching her every move. Her hands were steady, her voice calm. She'd practiced this. "You're right," I said. "It has been strained. Maybe we both said things we didn't mean." She smiled thinly. "I never meant to hurt you, Eleanor. You know that, right?" "Of course," I said softly. "That's why you changed the insurance policy, forged my signature, and told the town I was losing my mind." Her smile faltered. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. Then she laughed lightly, shaking her head. "You're imagining things again." "Am I?" I asked, leaning forward. "Because I spoke with Mr. Harrison at Midland Insurance. He told me everything. The meeting, the forged documents, the fire clause." Her eyes darkened. "You shouldn't snoop, Eleanor. It's not good for your heart." "That's funny," I said. "You seem very concerned about my heart considering you already wrote its obituary." She stood suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're paranoid," she snapped. "This is exactly why people think you're losing it. People think that because you've been feeding them lies," I said quietly. "You've built a perfect narrative, Vanessa. The confused old widow and the loving stepdaughter trying to help her. You made sure no one would believe me when I finally told the truth." Her voice turned cold. "And what truth is that, Eleanor? That I'm a murderer? Who would believe you now?" I let the silence stretch between us long enough for her to hear the weight of it. Then I said I would. That was when I saw it, the flicker of panic quickly buried beneath fury. She picked up the wine bottle and poured more into her glass, her hand trembling just slightly. "You're not well," she whispered almost to herself. "You're not well at all." She turned away, walking toward the kitchen. I heard the faint sound of a cabinet opening, the clink of metal, a soft whoosh. When she came back, the scent of gasoline was stronger. I looked down at the candle flames dancing on the tablecloth and understood exactly what was coming. "I'm sorry it has to end like this," she said, her tone almost gentle. "But I can't let you ruin everything your husband built. I can't let you destroy what's mine." I stood up slowly. "It was never yours," I said. Her jaw tightened. "It will be soon." Then, without warning, she flicked her wrist, spilling the wine across the table. The candles hissed as the liquid soaked the cloth. But it wasn't just wine. The sharp, acrid scent filled the air again. Not gasoline this time, lighter fluid. The flame caught instantly. Fire raced across the fabric, devouring the table in seconds. I stumbled backward, my sleeve catching the edge of the blaze. "Vanessa," I shouted, "stop this." She stepped back calmly, blocking the exit. The firelight made her face glow in shades of gold and red. "Goodbye, Eleanor," she said softly. Then she turned and left through the kitchen door, locking it behind her. Smoke filled the room almost immediately. My lungs screamed. I grabbed a napkin, pressed it to my mouth, and ran toward the hallway. The heat was unbearable, the sound of wood cracking like thunder. I could barely see through the haze. I tried the side door, locked, the front locked. Every window was sealed shut, painted over like before. The fire moved fast, hungry, merciless. I could hear the faint echo of her car starting outside. She was gone. I dropped to the floor, crawling, searching for a way out. My hands brushed against something cold metal. The knife I'd brought. Not a weapon anymore, but a tool. I crawled toward the window near the reading room, the glass reflecting orange light. My throat burned each breath a knife. I used the knife to pry at the window latch, coughing so hard I could barely hold it steady. The glass cracked but didn't break. I hit it again and again. Finally, it shattered. I dragged myself through, feeling the jagged edges slice into my arm and shoulder. The rain outside hit my skin like ice, a shock against the burning. I rolled onto the wet grass, gasping, staring up at the night sky as flames swallowed the house. From somewhere in the distance, I heard sirens. I pushed myself up, just enough to see the road. Her car was still there. She stood by it, phone in hand, crying fake tears into the receiver. I could faintly make out her voice. "Please hurry. My mother, she's inside." I wanted to scream, to run toward her, to tear that mask off her face in front of everyone, but I couldn't move. My body was shaking uncontrollably. I could only watch as she played the grieving daughter for the neighbors gathering nearby. A firefighter's flashlight swept across the yard. He didn't see me at first. I was lying just beyond the hedge, half covered in mud and smoke. I tried to call out, but my voice broke. Then the beam stopped fixed on me. "Hey, over here," he shouted. Hands pulled me up. Voices yelling orders. "She's alive. We've got one alive." I didn't speak. I didn't tell them who I was. I didn't tell them the woman sobbing by the car was the reason this house burned, because I knew the truth didn't belong here, not yet. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I caught one last glimpse of her. Vanessa was standing at the curb, mascara streaked, shaking her head like she couldn't believe what she'd just witnessed. Our eyes met for a half a second. In hers, I saw at the exact moment she realized what she'd done wrong. I was still alive. I turned my head away and whispered to myself, "You should have made sure." That was the last thing I said before the world went black. If you were me, burned, bruised, and watching your own murderer cry crocodile tears to the world, would you expose her immediately, or let her believe she'd gotten away with it while you built your revenge in silence? Comment 1 if you'd vanish and plan. Like this video if you'd rather face your monster in daylight. Because that night I didn't die in her fire. I was forged by it. When I opened my eyes, everything was white. White walls, white sheets. White noise humming from a fluorescent light above me. For a moment I thought maybe I hadn't survived, after all, that this was some sterile version of the afterlife. But then pain arrived sharp and immediate. My lungs burned. My arms were bandaged. My throat felt scraped raw from smoke. No, this wasn't heaven. This was the price of survival. A nurse appeared at my bedside. She was middle-aged, kind eyes, but cautious. "You're awake," she said softly. "Can you tell me your name?" I hesitated. My mind screamed Eleanor Blake, but my instinct said otherwise. "Jane," I croaked. "Jane Miller." The lie came easily rolling off my tongue, as if it had been waiting for years. She nodded, jotting it down. "You were found unconscious near a house fire. Severe smoke inhalation, minor burns. You're lucky to be alive, Jane." Lucky. That word never felt so hollow. When she left, I stared out the small window across from the bed. Outside, rain was falling again, washing the ash from the world. My reflection stared back, gray hair, matted eyes, bloodshot skin, pale. I didn't recognize that woman. Maybe that was good. Later that night, a doctor came in to check my vitals. "We weren't sure you'd make it," he said, scanning my chart. "The firefighters didn't find any identification on you. We reported you as a Jane Doe." Jane Doe. I repeated the name silently, a nameless, faceless ghost. That's what I'd become. But ghosts had power. Ghosts could walk unseen. 2 days passed before I could sit up without coughing. The nurses thought I was recovering slowly, but inside I was calculating. If the world thought I was dead, Vanessa would finally let her guard down. She'd start collecting her rewards, insurance money, property deeds, sympathy. And that's when I'd take everything back. On the third night, when the hallways were quiet and the machines beeped softly, I asked the nurse for a phone. "Just one call," I whispered. She hesitated, but pity won. "Family." "An old friend," I said. "Someone who'll understand." I dialed a number I hadn't used in 10 years. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Clara Morrison speaking. Her voice was like a crack of light through smoke. Clara had been my closest friend before we lost touch, an attorney sharp as glass, loyal as stone. I swallowed hard. "Clara, it's me." There was silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "Eleanor, my God, you're supposed to be dead." "I know," I rasped. "Don't tell anyone I'm not." "What happened?" "She tried to kill me," I said simply. "The house burned. I got out, but everyone thinks I didn't." "Vanessa," Clara said, her tone turning to steel. "Yes. Where are you?" I told her the name of the hospital. There was another pause, then the sound of keys clicking. "I can get you out of there, but you have to stay invisible. No police, no public record. Let her think she succeeded." "I already decided that," I said. By morning, Clara was there. She walked into my room wearing a trench coat and an expression that could cut glass. She didn't waste time. "They've identified the victim as you," she said quietly. "The body they found was too damaged for DNA, but the coroner accepted Vanessa's statement. She signed your death certificate yesterday." "Already?" "She's efficient," Clara said. "The insurance company wired the payout this morning, $850,000. Straight into her account." I stared at the ceiling. "So she gets everything." "For now," Clara said, "but you still own the truth, and that's worth more than money. We planned everything in whispers. Clara arranged for my transfer to a private facility under my new name. No records, no visitors. While I healed, she gathered information. Each day, she came back with more. Vanessa had held a memorial service. She'd cried for the cameras. She'd sold the ashes of the burned house lot to a developer, claiming it was too painful to rebuild. "She's good at playing victim," Clara said one afternoon, sliding a manila envelope across my bedside table. Inside were photographs, Vanessa smiling for reporters, shaking hands with an insurance representative. "But she's getting sloppy. I've traced payments from the insurance money to a shell company she created months ago. Same name as the one on your forged documents." I smiled faintly. "Med Supply Solutions." I whispered, remembering the name from the forged vendor file. Clara raised an eyebrow. "You remember details even through smoke. That's why she'll never win." When the bandages finally came off, I looked in the mirror again. My face had changed sharper lines, scars faint but visible along my temple. I looked older, harder, like someone who'd lived through hell and taken its map with her. "You look formidable," Clara said with a half smile. "I look alive," I replied. We spent the next week building the plan. Clara was meticulous. "You can't confront her yet," she said. "You need evidence. We'll start by tracking the money trail. Fraud is easier to prove than attempted murder." "She'll see me eventually," I said. "And when she does, I want her to understand exactly what she burned." "That day will come," Clara promised. Before she left one night, she stopped at the door and turned back. "Eleanor, are you sure you want to stay dead? You could rebuild somewhere else. Let it go." I met her eyes. "She buried me alive, Clara. I'm not done until she feels the weight of the dirt she threw." She nodded once. "Then I'll help you dig." When I was discharged, it wasn't as Eleanor Blake. It was as Jane Miller, a woman with no past, no history, no family. Clara rented a small apartment for me under that name 3 towns away. Sparse furniture. Plain walls, a single desk. I liked it that way. The emptiness was clean, honest. Each morning I woke before dawn and read the news on my phone. The headlines about Vanessa continued. Tragic fire claims widow's life, stepdaughter heroically survives. Each photo made my blood boil, but it also strengthened my resolve. The world saw her as a survivor. I would make them see her as what she really was. By the second week, Clara had obtained Vanessa's financial statements through a contact. She's moving fast, Clara said over coffee. She's investing in your late husband's company, leveraging sympathy for expansion. But here's the flaw: her spending doesn't match her reported income. The IRS will notice eventually. We'll help them notice sooner. I nodded slowly. We'll give them a reason to look. That night, I printed out every document we had and laid them across the desk: insurance transfers, shell company records, Vanessa's fake signatures beside mine. It looked almost beautiful, the symmetry of deceit. When the clock struck midnight, I picked up a pen and wrote in the center of the first page, Operation Rebirth. Because that's what this wasn't, not revenge for the sake of rage, but rebirth through justice. As I slipped the papers back into the folder, I whispered to myself, she thinks she killed me, but she only lit the fire. I'll be the one to burn her illusions to the ground. And if you were me, declared dead erased by your own family, would you reveal yourself too soon, or would you let them live in their lie until the moment it collapses on them? Comment 1, if you'd wait for the perfect strike. Like this video, if you'd already be planning the next move. Because sometimes survival isn't mercy, it's the start of the reckoning. Revenge doesn't announce itself. It walks in quietly, orders coffee, and sits across from the person who once tried to burn you alive. 3 months had passed since the fire, long enough for Vanessa to rebuild her image into something untouchable. The media called her the devoted daughter. The neighbors pitied her for losing me. Even the insurance company praised her resilience. She had turned my death into a brand. But brands have weak points, and hers was greed. Clara and I discovered that Vanessa was in talks with a private investor to expand Richard's old medical company under her new ownership. She'd booked a meeting at Cafe Verona downtown, a place where deals were made over espresso and flattery. Clara didn't think I should go. You're not ready, she warned. Seeing her in person will shake you. Clara, I said quietly, buttoning my gray coat. She already shook me once. I'm still standing. The cafe was elegant, with gold lights and polished wood, the kind of place where people pretended to be better than they were. I sat near the back, facing the door, a small table between me and destiny. The rain outside streaked the windows in silver. I'd chosen my disguise. Carefully short gray wig, subtle glasses, muted lipstick, enough to change the lines of my face, not the fire in my eyes. When she walked in, it was like watching a ghost inhabit someone else's body. Vanessa looked thinner, her hair shorter, her clothes sharper. Grief had become part of her wardrobe, a tool she wore like perfume. She laughed softly as she greeted the investor, touching his arm with rehearsed ease. They sat 2 tables away. I waited. Patience is the final weapon of the wronged. She was talking numbers when the waiter brought her a cappuccino. I caught his sleeve as he passed and slipped him a folded note with a 20. Please deliver this to the lady in the navy suit, I said. Tell her it was left for her. He nodded and carried it over. She looked puzzled as he placed the envelope beside her. She opened it casually at first, then froze. Inside was a single photo, me standing in the garden on the night of the fire. Taken seconds before the house ignited my reflection, faintly visible in the window behind me. Underneath it, in my handwriting, were 4 words. You missed your target. Her hand trembled. The investor was saying something, but she wasn't listening. Her eyes darted around the cafe, scanning faces. When they found mine, I didn't look away. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The noise of clinking cups, the soft music, the rain, all gone. Just her and me, 2 survivors of the same fire, but only one of us alive, in truth. She stood abruptly, muttering an apology to the investor, and walked toward me. I kept my eyes on her as she approached. She stopped at my table, her face pale. Who are you? She whispered. I smiled faintly. You know who I am. That's impossible, her voice cracked. You're dead. Am I? I said quietly. Or did you just wish hard enough that I would be? She stared at me like she was seeing a ghost, her pupils dilated, breath quick. You're lying, she hissed. You're not. Eleanor Blake, I interrupted softly. The woman you tried to murder for a house and a check. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. She glanced around, too many eyes. She leaned closer, whispering fiercely, "You don't know what you're doing. You'll ruin everything." I set my cup down deliberately. "You already did." "Why are you here?" she demanded. "What do you want from me?" "I want nothing," I said, meeting her eyes. "I just came to see if the fire burned your conscience as well as my home." Her jaw tightened. "You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" I reached into my coat pocket and slid a flash drive across the table. She didn't touch it. "That's every document you forged. Every transfer, every payment, and the audio recording from the night you met with Harrison at the insurance office." She blinked. You weren't even there." "No," I said, "but the cameras were. Clara subpoenaed the footage last week. You should have smiled for them." Panic flickered across her face before she masked it with anger. "This is extortion." "No," I corrected softly. "This is truth." Her hand shot out suddenly, snatching the drive, her fingers trembling. "You think anyone will believe you? You're dead on paper. You don't exist." I leaned in until our faces were inches apart. "Exactly. Which means I can move through your world like smoke, and you'll never know when the next spark hits." She stood abruptly, clutching the flash drive like a lifeline. "If you go to the police, I'll tell them you're insane. You faked your own death." I rose slowly, adjusting my coat. Let's see who they believe, the woman with scars evidence and a witness list, or the one whose fingerprints are still on a lighter found in the wreckage. Her breath hitched. "You can't prove that." I smiled faintly. "I don't have to. The fire department did. They just don't know who the lighter belonged to yet." Her eyes widened. "You wouldn't." "I already did." She backed away, her composure cracking like porcelain. "You don't understand, Eleanor. I had no choice. Dad, he left me nothing. You had everything, and I had nothing." "You had me," I said quietly, "and you tried to kill me anyway." Tears filled her eyes, not from guilt, but from fury. "You think this makes you the hero. You think anyone will forgive you for coming back from the dead." "I'm not looking for forgiveness," I said. "I'm looking for closure." She laughed bitterly, wiping her face. "You won't get it. You'll only destroy what's left of this family." I met her gaze steady and calm. "There's nothing left to destroy." She turned abruptly, storming out of the cafe, heels striking the tile like gunshots. The investor watched her go confused, then glanced at me. "Do you know her?" he asked. I smiled politely. "We go way back." When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, electric alive. Clara's car was parked across the street. She rolled down the window as I approached. "Well," she asked. "She saw me," I said, "and she's unraveling." Clara smirked. "Good, let her pull her own thread." As we drove away, I looked back at the cafe through the rearview mirror. Vanessa was still standing in the doorway, drenched in the reflection of her own panic. I realized then that revenge doesn't need noise or blood. Sometimes all it takes is survival and a well-timed truth. And if you had the chance to confront the person who tried to erase you, would you forgive them or let them drown in the silence they created? Comment 1, if you'd look them in the eye. Like this video, if you'd rather let the truth speak for itself. Because the fire didn't kill me. It taught me how to burn quietly. The truth isn't a weapon until you put it in the right room. 2 weeks after the cafe, that room was a courtroom. The state versus Vanessa Blake. Charges: insurance fraud, falsification of documents, obstruction of justice. Attempted murder wasn't on the docket yet, but it would be soon enough. Clara had filed the report using the evidence we'd gathered: forged signatures, false medical evaluations, money transfers to offshore accounts. The police took it seriously. Within days, they raided her office, froze her accounts, and subpoenaed her emails. When they found correspondence with the insurance agent referencing finalizing the fire claim, everything began to collapse. Vanessa denied everything. Her lawyers called it a clerical misunderstanding, but the judge ordered a full evidentiary hearing. That's when Clara leaned across her desk and said, "This is it. Time to stop being a ghost." The courthouse smelled like old wood and tension. Every bench was filled with reporters, neighbors, former employees of Richard's company. They'd all come to see the grieving stepdaughter defend her innocence. Cameras flashed as Vanessa entered perfectly dressed in black, again her mourning costume ironed and immaculate. The prosecutor opened calmly. "Your Honor, this case centers on deception greed and a scheme to defraud an insurance company by faking an accidental death. He paused, eyes shifting toward Vanessa. The victim's death certificate was signed by the defendant. She sat straight, composed her expression a mask of sorrow. Her attorney stood smiling thinly. "We'll prove Miss Blake acted in good faith, relying on information provided by authorities. This entire case is a tragic misunderstanding." I watched from the hallway behind the courtroom doors, listening. Clara sat beside me, her hand steady on my arm. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I do," I said. "She needs to see the ghost she buried walk back into the light." The prosecutor called his final witness Clara. She testified to the evidence we'd collected, the forged documents, the video from the insurance office, the shell company filings. When she mentioned a confidential informant who survived the fire, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. Vanessa leaned forward sharply. The judge banged the gavel. "Order continue." Clara's voice didn't tremble. "The informant is present today and ready to identify herself." The judge nodded, then let her be sworn in. That's when the doors opened and I walked inside. Every sound in that room died. You could hear the creak of my shoes against the floor, the soft inhale of disbelief from the crowd. I wore a simple gray suit, hair-cropped scars faint beneath the makeup, but still there. I moved slowly, deliberately letting the silence grow heavy enough to choke her. Vanessa's face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The judge looked at me over his glasses. "State your name for the record." I met his eyes. "Eleanor Blake." Gasps rippled through the room like a wave. The judge blinked. "Mrs. Blake, you were declared deceased." "Yes," I said evenly. "By her." I turned toward Vanessa. She rose from her chair as if pulled by strings, shaking her head. "This is insane. That's not possible. She's lying." The prosecutor raised a hand. "Your Honor, may we admit Exhibit F." He gestured to the large screen. The lights dimmed. The footage played the insurance office, Vanessa sitting across from Mr. Harrison. Her voice clear, steady. "I just need to make sure the fire coverage triggers properly. My stepmother isn't well. I'm afraid an accident might happen." Her lawyer jumped up. "Objection, this is out of context." "Overruled," the judge said sharply. The video ended, silence again. I walked closer to the witness stand, my voice calm but cutting. "You said I wasn't well, that I was confused, that I left candles burning. You told the world I was losing my mind. Tell me, Vanessa, did you believe your own lies when you poured gasoline around my chair?" She flinched. "You can't prove?" I held up the evidence folder. "This says otherwise. Your fingerprints on the lighter, the signed policies, the email to Harrison titled Final Phase. You weren't just planning an accident, you were planning an inheritance." The crowd murmured louder. The judge silenced them again. Vanessa's composure fractured. "You don't understand," she cried. "Dad left me nothing. You took everything." "I took nothing that wasn't mine," I said. "I kept his promise." "You turned love into a ledger." Tears streamed down her face, but there was no sorrow in them, only rage. "You were supposed to die. You were supposed to burn." Gasps filled the room. Her lawyer buried his face in his hands. The judge's gavel struck hard. "That's enough." But I wasn't finished. I stepped closer. Voice steady, low enough that only she could hear. "You should have made sure, Vanessa. You should have checked the ashes." Her knees buckled slightly. The prosecutor turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I believe the witness just confessed on record." The judge nodded slowly. Duly noted. I took a breath and faced the courtroom. I didn't come here for revenge. I came here because the truth deserves a witness. My husband built his life on integrity, and I won't let his legacy rot in someone else's greed. The judge's tone softened. "Mrs. Blake, you are remarkably composed for someone who has endured this." "I had months to practice," I said quietly. "The dead have nothing but time." Laughter, uneasy and restrained, rippled through the benches. Vanessa collapsed back into her chair, trembling. Her lawyer whispered frantically, but she didn't respond. She stared at me like she was still trying to understand how the fire had failed her twice. The judge recessed briefly. Reporters rushed out to call their editors. When we returned, Vanessa's attorney tried to negotiate, stammering about plea agreements. The prosecutor refused. "We'll let the jury decide." When it was over, the judge adjourned the hearing. Vanessa was escorted out in cuffs. Head bowed, reporters shouting her name. One of them turned to me. "Mrs. Blake, how does it feel to come back from the dead?" I looked at him, then at the sea of flashing cameras, and said simply, "I never left. I was just waiting for justice to catch up. Outside the courthouse, the sky was the same color as smoke before a storm. Clara joined me on the steps. "You did it," she said softly. I shook my head. "Not yet. She'll face trial, but real justice isn't a sentence, it's memory. She'll wake up every morning remembering that I walked out of her fire." Clara smiled faintly. "You realize you've just made history. The woman who outlived her own death certificate." "Let them write it that way," I said. "Maybe someone will remember the part about truth being harder to kill." We stood there for a while, watching the crowd. Then I noticed Paul among them, my neighbor, my quiet witness. His eyes met mine, full of relief. He mouthed a single word, "Finally." I nodded. When I got home that night to the small apartment that had become my refuge, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. Outside, city lights flickered like tiny fires, harmless this time. I thought about everything that had burned my house, my past, my illusions. But what survived was stronger than any flame. They say justice is blind, maybe, but sometimes she just waits in the dark until the light is ready to find her. And if you were me standing in that courtroom face to face with the person who tried to erase your name, would you have felt mercy, or would you let silence do the talking for you? Comment 1 if you'd look them in the eye and say nothing. Like this video if you believe surviving is the loudest revenge. Because that day I didn't just win a case. I reclaimed my name, my truth, and every inch of dignity she tried to burn. The world thought I died in that fire, but I was only getting started. Truth travels differently from lies. Lies sprint, they burn hot and fast, feeding on shock, but truth walks. It takes its time, steady, patient. Then one day, when you least expect it, you look up and realize it's everywhere. After the hearing, the world that had buried me started speaking my name again. Eleanor Blake. The newspapers that once called me the tragic widow now wrote about the woman who came back from the dead. The headlines were almost poetic. She survived the fire that was meant to kill her and exposed the one who lit it. Reporters camped outside Clara's office for weeks. I didn't speak to them, not yet. The silence said more. They used old photographs, images of me from charity galas, hospital events, board meetings with Richard, but the woman in those photos wasn't me anymore. That woman believed in family. The one standing now believed in consequences. Neighbors began stopping Clara on the street. "Is it true?" they asked. Was Vanessa really behind it? She never confirmed, just said, "You'll see when the full trial begins." Paul, my steadfast neighbor, became something of a local hero himself. He gave an interview to the local paper. "I always knew something wasn't right," he said. "She wasn't crazy, she was careful." His words spread online, quoted in every major outlet by morning. For the first time, people saw me not as a victim, but as a strategist who'd refused to die quietly. Then came the letters. Dozens, then hundreds, from women I'd never met, widows, stepmothers, estranged daughters, caretakers, each with a story that began the same way. They tried to take everything, but your story reminded me to fight. I read every single one. Some came from as far as Canada, South Africa, even Japan. Pain, it seemed, spoke a universal language. Clara and I agreed to one interview, just one, for the record. I remember sitting across from the reporter, a young woman with trembling hands and eyes full of awe. She asked softly, "Mrs. Blake, why didn't you reveal yourself earlier? Why wait?" I smiled faintly, because some truths need silence to ripen. If I'd come forward too soon, she'd still be the victim and I'd be the mad woman. Timing isn't just strategy, it's survival. She nodded, speechless. The article ran under the title, "The Fire That Didn't Kill Her." It went viral overnight. My words flooded social media. Sometimes the only way to survive the fire is to become it. People quoted it, painted it, printed it on shirts. I didn't expect any of that. I hadn't meant to inspire. I'd only meant to endure. Meanwhile, Vanessa's trial date loomed closer. Her lawyers tried to spin new narratives, mental instability, emotional distress. But the world had already made up its mind. The evidence was too strong. The public's outrage too loud. Even the judge seemed weary of her manipulations. Clara told me, "You've become a symbol, Eleanor. People see themselves in you." I shook my head. I don't want to be a symbol. I just wanted my name back. But that was the thing about stories, they stop belonging to you once they're told. The night before the sentencing hearing, I walked past my old property for the first time since the fire. The house was gone, just a vacant lot fenced with yellow tape and construction signs. Wild grass had grown through the ashes. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the cold air. The soil smelled faintly of smoke, but underneath it I could smell something else, earth wet and alive, renewal. Paul joined me there quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Never thought I'd see you standing here again," he said. "Neither did she," I replied. He chuckled softly, handing me a cup. "They're calling you the woman who beat death." I smiled at that. No one beats death, Paul. Sometimes it just takes a wrong turn. We stood in silence, watching the dawn rise over the ruins. Birds circled above their wings, catching the first light. It looked almost holy. By the next morning, reporters had gathered outside the courthouse again. This time, I didn't hide. When they swarmed around me, microphones outstretched, I didn't flinch. One asked Mrs. Blake, "What do you want people to learn from your story?" I answered simply, that silence can be powerful, but it shouldn't be permanent. If someone hurts you, speak. If no one believes, you gather proof. And if they try to bury you, remember the soil they use can grow things. The quote aired on every network that evening. Even late-night hosts repeated it. But to me, it wasn't clever. It was truth distilled from fire. When the sentence was finally read, 25 years in prison, Vanessa didn't look at me. She kept her head bowed, hands clasped tight as if in prayer. Maybe she was praying. Maybe she finally understood what it felt like to live inside the flames. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd clapped when I stepped out. I didn't wave or smile. I just nodded. Justice wasn't a celebration. It was a correction. That night, Clara poured us both a drink. "You realize you've started something bigger than you," she said. "People are calling it the Phoenix case." I laughed quietly. Let them. Every story needs a name. The phone rang. Another reporter. I didn't answer. I turned to Clara. "Tomorrow we close this chapter. Then I disappear again. No more interviews, no more headlines. Just peace." She nodded, smiling. "You've earned it?" If you'd told me a year ago that I'd become a living legend, I'd have laughed. I didn't want fame. I wanted to be believed. And now even strangers believed me. Maybe that was enough. And if you were me, standing where your own ashes used to be, would you seek the world's applause or just the quiet dignity of being heard? At last, comment one, if you'd walk away quietly. Like this video, if you'd let the world tell your story for you. Because sometimes, justice doesn't roar, it whispers. And those who once watched you burn will one day tell everyone how brightly you survived. The world moves on faster than grief. 1 week after Vanessa's sentencing, the headlines had already shifted to new scandals, new faces, new tragedies. The world loves survival stories, but it loves forgetting even more. I didn't mind. I hadn't survived to be remembered. I'd survived to live. Vanessa's prison mugshot appeared briefly on the evening news, a far cry from the polished woman who once smiled for charity galas. Her hair was cut short, her face pale under fluorescent lights, her eyes wide and hollow. She looked smaller somehow, like all the venom had drained out of her. The reporter's voice was clinical. Former businesswoman Vanessa Blake begins a 25-year sentence for insurance fraud and attempted homicide. I didn't feel joy, not even relief, just quiet finality. Clara called that night. "It's over," she said. "No," I replied softly. "It's finished." But things like this never really end. Because endings aren't tidy. They linger in the empty rooms and the burned soil, in the spaces where love used to live. Justice doesn't erase what happened, it just balances the scales. The state confiscated what was left of Vanessa's assets. Her cars, her accounts, her properties all liquidated. The insurance company recovered its payout through court order. I didn't ask for a cent. I had what I wanted, truth documented, name restored, silence broken. Still, people wanted me to celebrate. The prosecutor sent flowers with a note. "You're the strongest witness I've ever seen." A journalist mailed me a framed copy of the front page "She walked out of the fire alive." But I didn't hang it. I didn't need reminders of survival. The scars on my hands were enough. In December, snow fell for the first time since the fire. I took the train north to a quiet coastal town where no one knew my face. I rented a small cottage by the water, a single-story home with creaky floors and a wide window facing the sea. It smelled of salt and pine, of distance and peace. The first morning there, I woke to the sound of waves crashing against the rocks. I stood by the window wrapped in a wool shawl and whispered to the ocean, "You can stop fighting now." I wasn't sure if I was talking to the sea or to myself. Each week I received letters from strangers still writing about my story. Some said it gave them courage to leave abusive families. Others said it made them believe in justice again. I never wrote back. What could I say? That survival wasn't courage, it was stubbornness. That justice doesn't heal, it only stops the bleeding. One afternoon, Clara visited. She brought a box of papers, legal closures, final statements. "Everything's settled," she said, setting it on the table. "You're officially alive again." I smiled faintly. "That's good to know." "You could rebuild the company," she said. "The board would welcome you back. They're begging for your leadership." I looked out the window at the sea. "No, Clara, I've spent enough of my life building empires. Now I just want to build peace." She understood. She always did. Before she left, she hugged me for a long time. "You taught me something, she said. That silence isn't weakness. It's the sound before thunder." When she was gone, I sat by the fireplace and watched the flames dance. Fire used to mean fear, destruction, betrayal. Now it was just warmth again. I thought about Vanessa sometimes, not with anger, but with distance, the way you think about an illness you've recovered from. I wondered if prison walls made her understand what it felt like to be trapped in your own burning house, watching everything you love collapse. Or if she'd blame me forever. Maybe both. Once I received a letter from the prison. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Inside one sentence, I see you, in my dreams, standing in the fire and smiling. I burned it without reading further. Some ghosts belong in smoke. The following spring, I started volunteering at a local community center. Nothing grand, just reading to children after school. They didn't know who I was, didn't care. To them, I was just Miss Ellie, the lady who told stories and brought cookies. I liked it that way. I'd spent too long living as a headline. It was time to live as a person again. Sometimes the older kids would ask about the scars on my hands. I'd smile and say I touched something too hot once, but it taught me how strong skin can be. They'd laugh and I'd change the subject. Every night before bed, I lit one candle on the windowsill. Not out of superstition, out of gratitude, for light, for air, for time. I'd sit there watching the flame until it steadied, and I'd whisper, "You didn't take me." And if you were me, standing after everything with no revenge left to seek, no lies left to expose, would you forgive the person who tried to end you? Or would you simply let them fade into their own silence? Comment 1 if you'd let go. Like this video, if you believe peace is the best punishment. Because peace doesn't come when your enemies fall. It comes when their memory no longer matters. That night, the wind howled against the cottage and the ocean answered in slow, steady waves. The fire flickered low, warm, alive. I closed my eyes and smiled. After everything, I had finally come home. I waited until spring to visit Richard's grave. The snow had melted, and the air carried that soft scent of rain and renewal. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the sea, a quiet place where wind and memory spoke the same language. I brought white lilies, his favorite. The marble headstone was simple, engraved with his name and the words, "Forever steadfast." I knelt, brushing away a few fallen leaves. "You were right, Richard," I whispered. "You always said truth would outlive the noise. I just didn't think I'd have to prove it this way." The breeze lifted my hair as if answering. For a long time, I said nothing. I just listened to the distant gulls, the rustle of the trees, the hum of life continuing without permission. For the first time since the fire, I felt calm, not because everything was over, but because it no longer owned me. I told him everything softly, like confessing to an old friend. How Vanessa had been sentenced, how the company was stable again under new management, how I'd chosen not to return. "I could have rebuilt it," I said. "But I think we build too many things in life that end up owning us. Maybe this time I'll just let things grow on their own." I set the flowers down and pressed my palm to the cold stone. The scars on my skin felt almost warm against it. "You can rest now," I whispered. "She can't touch what we built anymore." When I stood, I looked out toward the sea. The horizon was pale gold, endless. The fire had taken my house, my reputation, my certainty, but it hadn't taken the one thing Vanessa could never understand: the quiet dignity of survival. As I walked back toward the gate, a young couple passed me, holding hands, talking about weekend plans. They didn't recognize me. To them, I was just another woman in gray, someone fading into the background. And I smiled because that was exactly who I wanted to be. At home that evening, I brewed tea and sat by the window watching the light fade. The candle flickered beside me, steady and calm. I thought about everything that had happened: the lies, the betrayal, the courtrooms, the noise, and how strange it felt to finally be still. I'd spent so long surviving that I'd forgotten what quiet felt like. I realized then that survival wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something simpler: freedom from anger, from needing anyone to see me as the hero. Sometimes people ask what justice feels like. It doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like breathing again after smoke. It feels like standing in the same fire that was meant to destroy you and realizing it's only warm now. If you were me, standing at the end of a story written in ashes, would you look back or keep walking? Would you forgive the ones who burned you or just let them live with their own fire? Comment 1 if you'd forgive in silence. Like this video if you'd walk forward and never look back. Because here's what I learned: dignity isn't in winning, it's in enduring. Justice isn't in punishment, it's in peace. And truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to survive long enough to be heard. Outside, the tide was coming in waves, curling white against the shore. I opened the window, letting the salt air fill the room. Somewhere behind me, the clock ticked steadily, the same rhythm it had kept through every loss, every storm. I blew out the candle. Smoke curled upward, then disappeared into the night. For a moment, the darkness felt complete. Then the moon broke through the clouds, spilling silver light across the floor. I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I'd finished. That was the real ending. Not the courtroom, not the sentence, not even the peace that came after. The ending was this: the sound of the ocean, the weight of the quiet, the knowledge that the fire inside me no longer needed to burn anyone. It could just keep me warm. And that's enough.